A formal welcome to all of you to Alchemist Book Club, where we say the ideas take shape. A special welcome to all the newcomers who have been new to our book club meeting. So I'll take a couple of minutes before we go on to a very special session today with an author talk about just a few words about what Alchemist is all about. So we are, 2 years into this process of, going through discussing about books. One thing that has stood out for all of us is the collective thinking is so very powerful, not only to, understand a subject, but penetrating and to understand even more deeper and also translate into some meaningful, quotients into our brain. So Alchemist Book Club is an initiative in order to make us all, think collectively. And we keep the book as a hero. So we take, one book as a hero, and then we discuss about, that particular book. We engage and discuss. That's the whole point. It's not a one-way narration of the book, but, book is kept as a hero, and then we go into the depth of the book, ultimately, translating into shifting, some kind of a shift it should create into our lives. So this is the entire purpose of Alchemist Book Club. In a nutshell, it started as a very close group of like-minded people in April 2018. It's been 2 years now. At the end of the first year only, we actually felt the need of even naming that as Alchemist Book Club. And at the end of the second year, which is about a few months back, we actually thought, instead of just being, open to just 20, 25 people, we should open it up and we should be able to bring in more people and discuss about books. And there are so many like-minded people eventually we discovered. So far we have covered 28 plus meetings and 22 plus books. So the idea here is discussion on the books, and we take all sort of books in order to discuss. So it's basically, in a nutshell, it's extracting and penetrating into a subject from different viewpoints to deepen our learning, more than just finishing the book. So this is what Alchemist Book Club is all about. I request Divakar to just take us through the kind of books that we have covered before we introduce the speaker, the author for today.
Yeah. Thank you, TG. Our book club, we go with the different varieties of books we discuss. We started from one thing. I don't want to name all the books, but these are all the books where we have discussed in depth. For example, the one thing, The Art of Thinking Clearly, or some of the books which we have discussed in depth more than 2 to 3 sessions, because the book has a very detailed content, and it created a lot of curiosity among the speakers as well as the audience. So we had in-depth discussion on these topics. This was on the year 1. We can go to the next slide, TG. TG, can you go to the next slide? Yeah. So last year when we had celebrated few books in a big way. One book is Ikigai. It was the last edition which I thought that I can share in depth about it. So this book has been very interesting. It has been reviewed by 3 young fellows who are at their university. One person is a doctor who is studying in medicine. Another person is an architect. And the third person is a psychologist at the age of 20, 21. And the way which they explained, the clarity they had, it was a good experience for all of us. The inputs which they have shared it over here, that was a key insight. These are all some of the books which we had it, management book, personal books, like Notes to Myself, or some of the books. And we also had a fiction book, is a feather in the cap. We started to reviewing on the fiction books. Earlier, we used to do only the non-fiction books. So this year we have developed ourselves to review on the fiction book, and that was quite interesting over there. So these are all some of the flavors which I thought that I can share it over here to the audience today, that what kind of books which we have shared. Thank you, TG, for giving this opportunity.
Thanks, Divakar. Now over to the special, very special session of author meet today. So we are all looking forward to it, and we're going to discuss about this very favorite topic of hers on parenting. Let me ask Reena to introduce Mrs. Aarti, please.
Hi to all. As TG Srinivasan said, we keep the book as a hero. So today the book, we already discussed it. We are going to have the hero back again. Parenting Innocence to Inner Sense. This book has been co-authored by Aarti Rajaratnam and Brinda Jairam. They both are leading psychologists with over a decade of experience of working with both the children and parents. They are presenting explanations of complex concepts without the complex jargon, tips to help you as a parent use a more rational and scientific approach while dealing with your child. And most importantly, deals with the issue that plague today's family, including the toxic effects of all the social media and everything. Let me introduce you today our guest, Aarti C. Rajaratnam. She has a master's in applied psychology with specialization in clinical psychology, childhood and adolescence mental health from the University of Delhi. She's a master practitioner and a trainer in NLP, neuro linguistic programming, and is also trained in transactional analysis, dream analysis, hypnotherapy, transpersonal psychology, and actually it goes on and on and on. It's a very long list actually. She has a credit certification in psychological first aid from the Department of International Health, Bloomberg School of Public Health, Johns Hopkins University, USA. She is actually an education design consultant also and have been instrumental in designing innovative classroom curriculum models in India and abroad. You can actually contact her. She has a website, Million Smile. Is it right? Yeah. Is it right, Aarti? Million Smiles. Yes. And now I hand over to Aarti and let the session begin.
So good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for all of this warmth that I get every time that I connect with you guys. But it would have been just easier to say that I'm a fellow book lover. I read more than I communicate with people, because I think books have been like oxygen to my soul. So I would never trade that hobby for anything else. So thank you for having me here. I had a very interesting topic given to me. Where does the parent's role end and the child's role begin, and so on? So it's a very peculiar way to look at parenting. So that's where I thought, while I was speaking to you, I would introduce you to another book which you might enjoy reading. It's by James Cars, a philosopher and a person who lectures a lot on religion. I read this book probably about 15 years back or slightly earlier than that. And it talks about two types of games in the world. It's finite games and infinite games. Finite games are games which have known rules. It has known players. The objective is well defined, and there is a winner or a loser in the end. And then there are infinite games where both known and unknown players will participate. The objective is to play the game for as long as you can. Third, the rules keep changing. And the fourth, there are no winners or losers. So the basic point that Cars tries to make in that is that in life, most of the things that we experience are actually infinite games. A marriage, for example, is an infinite game. Nobody becomes a winner or a loser in a marriage. They only try to stay in the marriage as long as possible. And the rules will keep changing. What you start off in your relationship may not be the way you engage with in the relationship 10 years later or 20 years later. Education, learning, reading, all of these are infinite games. Surprisingly, we live in a world that has defined everything through finite means. Meaning that if I have to learn, I should get 90%, then I'm a good student. I've already set certain finite rules for it. If I'm a good parent, then my child should behave like this. If I'm a good teacher, then I should be able to do this. If I'm a good engineer, I should do this. So we've started defining infinite things in very finite rules, and which is where parenting begins to suffer. Because what has happened, if you look at it, when I wrote the book about 7 years back, parenting was slightly different. Now parenting is very, very different, especially because we find that there are a lot of parents actually competing with each other. They've gone into a finite space, which is why even the title, which says, where does my role end and where does someone else's role begin? In a finite game, there are rules like that. In infinite space, there's co-regulation. I'm a parent, I have a child, together we discover the world. In relation to me, you will change. In relation to you, I will change. And this giving and taking is what this whole parenting process is. So I'm sorry I burst the bubble of the title straight out, but parenting is not a linear process. Parenting is not a perfect process. Parenting is a process that we learn on the job. So I can give you examples of parents before they had their baby. So read every book, went on to every blog, did so many workshops, and then the baby was born and it challenged everything they had learned. It completely made them throw away all the rules that they had, because each child has a completely different way of relating to the world. So one of the things that we've sort of discovered as we've gone through, and as you know, neuroscience and MRI studies and everything have started coming in more nowadays. So fMRI studies especially, we've started realizing that the neural started the book with the parenting styles and things like that, and now we realize that there are no such concrete categories for parenting. Parenting is more an ongoing relationship that is built. So by saying that, I would just give you certain very simple rules before we go forward, and I'll specifically add something for the COVID situation. Now, there are 4 things neurologically that we need to be aware of as parents. And why I'm making this very important is that if we don't understand these rules, we'll still be believing that behavior is a product of reward and punishment. I'll give you this, I'll help you with this, etc. Please don't believe that. That's like learning theories which are slightly outdated right now. So let's understand what are the 4 basic needs for a growing child or a growing brain. First is neurostimulation. So don't worry about the jargon. I'll break it down as simply as I can. Neurostimulation. So what does the brain need in neurostimulation? It will need rest, and it will need a combination of activities and play. If I do not have the rest, activities and play, and I'll tell you what is the difference between activities and play, what will happen? The brain does, what does the brain do in neurostimulation? The brain creates new circuits or new pathways, and it prunes or cuts away pathways that I don't need. So earlier, I didn't know how to walk. So my neural pathways were set in certain ways to teach me how to walk. Once I've mastered walking, whatever were supplementary systems that were supporting my walking, that will be cut off. That's called synaptic pruning. So pruning doesn't happen, the child has a lot of difficulties in regulating or understanding behavior. Now, what is play? What is activity? Play is always self-driven, driven by the child, and it has no purpose, and it will have a continuity, and there is no end goal. In activity, it will be designed by an adult or somebody else, and there will be clear objectives. So play is infinite, activity is finite, and this is the difference between the two. Children always indulge in infinite activities, not in finite. So today I may play with the same toy in this way, tomorrow I'll play in a different way, because my nervous system will need to do it in a different way. The second is neuromodulation. Modulation means being able to regulate or being able to balance. For this, the brain needs a lot of experiences and exploration. And what will it do when it has experiences and exploration? What does the brain do? It starts healing itself. And it also does one very important thing, inhibition and excitation. So for any response, now when you see the screen, there will be an excitation response, meaning, oh, I have to learn, I have to do something. And this excitement needs to be balanced or modulated. Otherwise, I'll be the super enthused, excited, shouting person. And in learning, if excitation happens, the child is so excited answering the teacher, doesn't allow anybody else to speak. Ma'am, 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 I'll speak. And then teacher says, calm down, and the child is not able to calm down. These are the children that we unnecessarily call hyperactive or badly behaved. They're not actually badly behaved or anything. The excitation went up, and the brain did not know how to modulate. The third area is what we call neurorelaxation. As the word says, it helps you to calm down. It helps you to remove the toxins and increase normal functioning. For this, as the rule says, you need to be able to sleep regularly. If sleep is compromised, neurorelaxation does not happen, and you're always functioning from the stress response. The fourth and the most important, which is neurodifferentiation, meaning learning. If the first 3 of modulation, relaxation, and stimulation are properly taken care of, the brain make small learnings possible. Why is this important in our parenting process? Till now, we have believed that when I do something and I give something, my child will learn, and as a result, he will or she will do something. We have learned neurologically that that is not true. When you provide for experiences and allow the child to go through these experiences, and you as a parent play a supportive role, then learning of any behavior or any skill becomes much, much better. So now, leaving this aside, I'd like to go through the COVID situation and how anxiety has been very high amongst our children. though we have spent a lot of time talking about statistics, governmental policy, safety, hygiene, WHO vaccine, all of this, one of the biggest and the most neglected areas is our children. Children have been deprived of everything that they have required for normal functioning. They have been cooped up in the house, been made to watch a screen, doing instructional learning or learning from a teacher who's teaching on a board every day, whether it is meaningful or not. And even worse than that, they've been deprived from the most important need, which is social connection and being able to play with others. During this period, I have had to work with so many children with anxiety. And anxiety in children shows up in many ways. So I've listed out about 8 ways in which children experience anxiety. And when we go into our discussion, I'd probably be happier to explain some of these as we go through it. The first symptom of anxiety in young children is anger. You will notice that they tend to get angry with you without any reason. They tend to fly off the handle without any reason. This is because they're feeling very uncomfortable inside them and they're unable to regulate this. A second symptom of anxiety, and the most common one, is sleep disturbances. So I've heard mothers saying, I went to his room and I saw that he was awake at that time. Or, as soon as I entered his room, he woke up and he said, Amma, but I've been awake. That's the second symptom. So in sleep, you could have difficulties going to sleep, difficulty staying asleep, and difficulty waking up. Because I've not slept deeply, I have difficulty waking up in the morning. The third symptom, of course, is defiance. And many parents keep saying, ma'am, he's misbehaving during the lockdown. He's always fighting with me. This defiance is because they're feeling something and unable to communicate this. When they're unable to communicate their certain emotions, it could come up. The anxiety comes up as defiance or a temper tantrum. The fourth is lack of focus, inability to focus on anything. As a result, this is leading to a lot of gadget addiction, because what is happening, I'm not able to focus. I'm not able to focus on the task at hand. I'm not able to deal with my emotions. So I look at a screen and I just, space out. And this spacing out is causing a lot of addiction or addictive behaviors to the screen. The next is what technically we call chandeliering. Chandeliering is where I feel something. I'm a relatively calm person. I have normally never easily provoked and all that. But for a small change in the environment, I blow the and you say, what has happened? And the child doesn't know what happened. That is chandeliering, and it's a very common symptom of anxiety. The next is, of course, avoidance, avoiding things, avoiding tasks. And I'll give you a simple example. A very close friend of mine has an 8-year-old son. And, he came and said, Amma, I want to have your surname also attached to my name. So she said, Kanna, don't have my name. You have Tata's name, have grandfather's name. And the boy said, no, I don't want to have Tata's name because Tata is dead. So, why I'm using this is children will show their anxiety by avoiding certain things that provoke the anxiety, like death. Because every day they're reading about so many people having died, or older people or elderly people dying very often and things like that. And so children will avoid those kind of things. The next is, of course, negativity, saying that, everything is bad, all of you are bad, I'm having a bad time, the whole world is going to end, all those kind of doomsday prophesying kind of thing. And the last, of course, is over planning. Many children deal with anxiety by over planning all the time, extreme kinds of, setting, over scheduling, doing things perfectly as a way of trying to feel in control because they're feeling out of control. What can I do as a parent? I'll quickly finish this and then we'll open it out to the interaction, because during the interaction, I'm sure we'll have a lot more discussions, because in the online medium, when one person talks, it's very difficult to pay attention. So what can I do as a parent, irrespective of the emotional fallout that my child is having? Number one, and the most important, is sleep. Because every organism, biologically, when you see it, every organism has a normal, natural way of recovering from any situation. And for human beings, the best way is through sleep. Because if I have regular sleep, brain has what is called glial cells, which will filter out all these unnecessary stress hormones and things that cause anxiety, and it reduces a lot of these pains. So the first thing that you need to, as a parent, maintain in your child is bring in sleep. How do I bring about sleep? By modeling good sleep habits myself. Very often parents also, because of the lockdown, we have meetings the whole day. So we're sitting and binge watching late in the evening and things like that. Children are observing these behaviors. So the first rule that we would follow is, of course, that you will have to bring in sleep. Second, the children always will be able to regulate their anxiety and their problems through play. So please allow for a lot of play. Of course, if you are lucky enough to have outdoor play in the place that you are living, using the large muscle groups is the best way for children to regulate emotion. If that's not possible, wet sand is useful, clay is useful, finger painting is useful. These are all ways young children regulate emotion. For older children, especially teenagers, giving them an opportunity to have calls with their friends and having chats with their friends, those kind of things will be very, very useful, because for them, the regulation is through the peer group. Between the ages of 8 and 12, because young children will use fantasy, between the ages of 8 and 12 will be a good time for you as a parent to have a discussion with your child. And those are the ways in which they would be able to mitigate the severity of the anxiety they're feeling. The third, so first is sleep, second is play. Third, we need to model what they can feel. So if we are also feeling very anxious and we're always talking about anxiety and death and things like that, children start also feeling very, very anxious. So one of the best ways in dealing with this will be for us to also let them know, listen, I'm also feeling anxious about it, but anxiety comes because I'm trying to focus on the future and control the future. That may not be possible. In the here and now, what can I do? Social distancing, maintaining hygiene, making sure that I don't leave the home unnecessarily, and also indulging in hobbies that make me feel calmer. And the most important, when we start modeling, children start understanding that it's okay to sometimes not feel okay, as long as I'm able to build back my resilience and come back into a normal state of functioning. And the fourth way in which we can help our children will be to help them use any of the arts, like, painting or drawing or something, because many children are often pre-verbal when it comes to their emotions. They're not able to express their emotions very well. So it may be easier for them to, just paint or draw or something, or do a craft, do something hands-on. Because technically, we've always said the hand needs a brain and the brain needs a hand. So when we use something hands-on, emotions get regulated much faster for young children. I'm going to stop here. And if there are quick questions, I'll start taking them, because as we interact, I'll be able to reach a lot more, because I'm sure that many of you have read the book and you've had a lot of doubts associated with that. So I'll go through the questions, and as we do that, we may be able to reach some more solutions together.
Thank you so much, Aarti, for that introduction, and straight away bursting the bubble of the topic.
Yes.
And we need experts like this in order to burst the bubble in a right way. Correct. So we have some questions from put them on to Satya and Reena for the questions which Satya had here.
Yes. You're muted again. Muted again.
I keep asking Aarti now and then. I'll let others to do. Anytime doubt comes, I just tend to go and she helps. Others can. Maybe topic, can we, where do you think the topic has come, TG? The parents' role has, where it ends. I don't think there's any ending processes, any end is there for parents' role. It's never ending. It's never ending. And
that way, if you take, Reena, any role that we play as a human being is infinite. It doesn't go under finite rules. In fact, even in a company, when you are leading, you don't have like an end. And when you are following or being part of the team, your role doesn't end.
Yes.
These are not finite spaces. So naturally, they wouldn't come under the finite spaces at all. They're all infinite. And the more qualitative the relationship, the more ongoing it's going to be. So I think that sort of puts the whole thing.
Any conflict that we see between parents and child is the child says that I don't have freedom to select or to do what I want. Why should I always be controlled by what my parents want? How do these children how can they overcome such a feeling, or how can they adjust to that and then overcome?
Right, and this is something that you're likely to face between 13 and 26 years. It's not going to be younger than that. It's not going to be older than that. So it starts off with the second brain revolution, where the striatum, we call it the striatum, a part in the brain which pushes towards risk-taking behavior. And can you mute yourself, please? So one of the things that happens with the striatum, so the teenager goes through a lot of brain changes, and the natural. So for a teenager, risk equals reward. So what will happen is, anything that we say, the striatum says, let's try something else. And because the amygdala, the emotional part, is likely to be more active, it's going to not allow them to regulate that. So for you and me, we may feel like doing something. Now, let me give you a simple example. One of the researches that was done is that they see people standing in the platform of a railway station, and they say that about 80% of people always imagine pushing that person down. And everybody has that basic impulse of trying to push them down, because as children, if you've noticed, we've done these things, pounced on somebody, hidden behind a door and frightened somebody, because these are all normal ways in which people engage with each other. These are quite normal. So having said this, what happened is, with a teenager, this ability to control that pushing sometimes is limited, because they are not able to take that emotional aspect, take it to the consequences part of the brain and say, this is not behavior that I can indulge in. Having said this, when you ask, they say that they feel controlled. One of the reasons they feel controlled is because they're very expansive. Usually around 14 and a half, you'll start realizing that they have this thing that I know everything and you don't know anything. You are an older generation. You won't understand what I'm saying. These kind of statements are likely to come because they're exploring their own identity. Because till about 12 years, the child has taken their identity as, I'm so-and-so's daughter, I am so-and-so's grandchild, I belong to this family, I belong to this house, kind of thing. Now they're saying, I want to be defined as somebody who's not your child. I want to be this peer group's coolest kid, or I want to be this person. I'm a photographer, I'm an artist, I'm this. They're trying to look for an identity without the adults involved. As a result, anything that you say and do will be considered or perceived as control. So how do we overcome it? The best way is to have a decent discussion. And this is where, for all parents, I use something called a connection ritual. I request you, for any relationship that you would like to build, any relationship, whether it's a friendship, it's a relationship with a partner, it's a relationship with your child, you need to set what's called a connection ritual. Ritual meaning it has to happen every day. And even if you don't go into it, it has to be set aside. Every day, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I set aside a time where me and the other person indulge in something that both of us enjoy. So if both of us enjoy music, we're going to do something related to music. Or if both of us enjoy going out for a walk, going out for a run, something like this, and it should be something that's gadget-free. What happens is, when I set this connection ritual with my teenager, it starts building the bridge upon which communication can happen. Many times, teenagers will say, I don't want to talk to you, there's nothing to talk to you. But the connection ritual actually sort of breaks the ice there and says, listen, it's okay if you don't have anything to talk to me, but let's have this ritual. Let's have this chat. So what will happen is, it becomes the safe space in which the child who's naturally exploring an identity tends to start reaching out saying, I'm having this problem, and this is why I perceive that you're controlling. And they may say things like, you do these things, but this friend's mother does this. And then, it becomes an insight for us also that this generation may not respond to our parenting style. So it gives that space for us to improve ourselves as parents. So I hope I've answered that question in terms of setting a connection ritual as a way to help understand what they're going through, what they're perceiving as control, and using that to co-regulate and find solutions together. So I hope I've answered that question.
Yeah. Hey, this is Divakar here. I have read your book, Aarti. This is the second time I have read it. One of the questions which I thought of asking for the quality time, I think you have responded partially on the connection ritual, but you have come up with 8 components in the book. Yes, maybe if you can share some thoughts on that 8 components, that would be really helpful.
You want me to go through all the 8 components? I have the book right here. I have to refer to it.
So one or two components, if you can say, which would be really helpful in this COVID situation, because we have a good time now. We are all, see, for example, in my, I have 2 kids. I think this is in the last 4 months where I'm having my breakfast, lunch, and dinner together. This is a blessing which I'm seeing it in this COVID situation. But I'm really want to get some thoughts from you that how can I capitalize that as a quality time with them, rather than they see that kind of it, or I'm not supposed to take it as an advantage. If you can share that, that would be really great.
So the thing is, COVID has given us a lot of time. I don't know if it has given us a lot of quality, because what has happened is that a lot of parents are also under a lot of stress, like job losses, extreme numbers of meetings that are unproductive. I'm sure all of you who are working from home will agree that we're doing more and more meetings that are totally useless and unproductive. We're just clocking in hours in front of a screen and wasting everybody's time. I'm sorry I'm putting it so bluntly, but I think we have actually deprived our life of a lot of quality. earlier also, even if we just had 10 minutes with our children, it was so beautifully qualitative. Now we've become crisis managers. We are all the time looking at, whether my child is on time for their class. Are they doing this? Are they doing that? So it's really dangerous in that sense. But there are 7 components of quality time. I'm going to read out from the book. But the first need is very, very important, which is love and acceptance. And why have I given the first importance of quality time to love and acceptance is because unless a person feels safe, they will never be able to explore or learn from the environment. And the most important thing that I would like for, could you please mute yourself? Could you please mute yourself? Yes. So the most important aspect of love, because there are 3 basic human needs. The first is safety, the second is satisfaction, and the third is attachment or connection with the other person. Now, when safety needs are met, only then I will be able to move into other things. And love and affection become the primary drivers for that. Because we've read about the attachment theories in psychology. It says when somebody has secure attachment, meaning that they understand that the primary caregiver, mother or father, will be able to meet my needs whenever I need to be responded to, the child is able to move on to the next set. So here in the COVID situation, the basic rules that I would use are Gary Chapman, because that's the easiest way to understand love. Gary Chapman's love languages, the 5 love languages. Children express love in the way they understand. So if I understand touch, I'm going to use touch as my love language. If I understand quality time, like I want to spend time doing something qualitatively, I will express it with you that way. If I like acts of service, I will always be rushing to help you. If I am somebody who understands words of appreciation, I will also appreciate you. And the 5th person is the person who understands gift. So if the person understands love as gifts, they're going to keep giving you gifts. Depending on how your child expresses love, it may be a good thing for you to also respond to them with their love language. It enhances your relationship much more. The second need is attention. And by attention, today's parent has become the helicopter parent, because even if they're going to class, in fact recently there was an ad of a phone which the child can carry with them, and that phone keeps recording what the child is doing. It's almost like a spy software kind of thing. It's a very dangerous thing to give attention like that. But attention is when the child needs you. So many times what happens is children will come and say, Appa, come and play with me, and they're actually asking for your attention when they're doing that. Children will not come and tell you, I'm feeling stressed, let's talk about it. They're going to say, come and play with me, or look at what I'm doing, see what I made. These are all ways in which they're looking for your attention. When your child does that, if you're not able to pay attention immediately, let them know, Kana, I'm busy right now at this time, and you know that you may be free around 5 o'clock or 4:30 or something. Let them show them the clock and say, at this time, I will definitely sit with you. I'll be able to sit with you for 5 minutes. And let them know exactly visually on a clock how many minutes that means. Because when you are able to keep that promise, especially for attention needs, the child is able to trust you more, and it builds better relationships. The third need is belonging and security. And if you notice, all of my quality time components work so much on the relational aspect of your relationship. So it's not working on gifts, or it's not working on transactions. It's working on the sense of belonging. If belonging and security are not there, again, it becomes a problem. And this is where, you don't say things like, if you don't eat your carrots, I will ask somebody to come and carry you away. When you come back, I won't be here. I'll leave you and go away. These kind of statements actually hit the core of belonging and security. Maybe our parents, grandparents used it saying, we'll leave you here, we'll send you to hostel. But these are the worst parenting words that you can use. The fourth one is, of course, companionship and friendship. And companionship and friendship must be with their own peer group. And what they experience with you will be love, affection, attention, belonging, and security. When these 3 needs are met, they're able to build companionship and friendship with others, because they have secure relationships as a base. And this companionship and friendship need should not be with the parent. When parents say, I'm like a friend to my child, we have somehow failed in our parenting duty. The fifth is communication. Communication needs to be two-way, and that's very, very important. Then there is creativity and expression. Creativity is one of the most important needs for the human being. because as much as relationships and connections are important, creativity becomes that much important. Currently with the gadget addiction pandemic, that's another pandemic as far as I'm concerned, with gadget addiction happening so much, creativity has been challenged because imagination has been stunted right in the beginning. Everything is already explicitly explained on a screen, so the child is unable to use the inner vision to be able to see or to be able to imagine things for themselves. And the last need is opportunities for achievement. And by this I mean that, you know, as parents, we don't keep pushing them to compete, don't push them for certifications and all that. In this pandemic has also created that other epidemic of e-certificates. Do something for 1 hour and you get one e-certificate. I think that is the worst way of certifying learning, because learning is something so internal. An attendance certificate doesn't certify you for being something better. So please stop pushing your children to be able to all the time do certifications and competitions. Instead, if they're able to wholesomely participate in things, that would be a better way. So when I say these 7 components of quality time are actually what constitute quality time, there is so much that we can do. So in terms of your question, what can be done to meet all these needs? The best thing is to rotate activities. Don't do the same thing every day. Children have this thing that we'll repeat it every day. I played it yesterday, I want to play it again today. I want to play it again tomorrow. If you do that, it becomes boredom and it becomes tantrums very soon. So what I normally do is have the element of surprise always. Let them know that, you know, we're going to do this tomorrow, and a day after tomorrow I have a surprise. And the next day after you finished your task, say day after tomorrow, or the next day you're going to do this particular activity. So let them know that each day you have put in effort to build on something for them. When they know that you're putting in the effort to build up, it makes a big difference. So I hope I've answered that question.
Yes, thank you very much for this wonderful answer, Aarti. It actually gave me some clarity to me that on the I can interconnect on the connection ritual, and then how I can make this as a habit for them to take it forward. It's a wonderful response. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Aarti ma'am, hi. This is Vignesh, Mridula's husband. I think you are a good acquaintance of Mridula from TVS School.
Oh yes, very much. Yes,
yeah, big fan of yours. I've just asked her to take her afternoon nap and given her a bit of a break. Right. And fortunately, I'm one of those lucky ones who's kind of quit and looking to do something else. So I have all the time in the world to spend with Vihan and Mridula. So it's an absolute pleasure to be a part of this meeting. Just a follow-up question very quickly. Yes. On companionship, I'd just like to know, there are a few limitations, obviously, you know, when we have kids and, you know, kids have a specific set of neighbors, and obviously, you know, all the kids of the neighbors are, you know, locked down and, you know, everyone is at home. Mm-hmm. So you don't necessarily get to choose your friends. You don't necessarily get to meet your classmates as such. So the peer group has a bit of a difference when it comes to the age as such. Mm-hmm. And Vihan, at this point in time, our son is in sort of a peer circle right now, where, you know, he gets to interact with a lot of the kids who are a lot older to him. And there are a few instances, you know, when there's a bit of an experimentation with the older kids when it comes to, you know, manipulation and I know it's a harsh word, but you know, but whatever I perceive,
naturally it will happen.
Yeah, obviously. Happen. And you know, something like, you know, possessiveness, where, you know, you have a bit of a hero worshipping, and obviously it used to tick our boxes when we were younger as well. So so is there any way we could, you know, help the neighbor's kid and our kid in any ways?
It's a beautiful question, because, you know, it goes to the core of human relationships. And yes, not just COVID, even otherwise, if you look at it, children may not always have in their neighborhood children of their own age group. I think we were lucky, the lucky generation that had people who were peers and everything. But today's generation, I think every family has one child, maximum 2, and it's very, very difficult to find a peer group. And between the 2 children, there's a 5-year age, you know, like a gap between the 2 kids. They don't play with each other, so it becomes very tricky. But having said that, one of the most beautiful things that I've noticed with children is that they have this natural need to connect, and as a result, they have a natural ability to adapt as well. What our role needs to be, and especially when you see that, you know, there are varying ages and there is a little bit of manipulation and things like that, you in your adult wisdom know that it's manipulation. For the child, it's just part of the relationship. So this is where, as a parent, I can use this as a teachable moment, meaning that I can sit and have a discussion with my child about, do you know that, you know, you mentioned this, is it something that you're happy about, or is there something that you would like to change about it? And why always questions is because, see, in technical terms, the right hemisphere grows faster than the first, not faster, but the right hemisphere processes information first and then takes it to the logical left hemisphere. So whenever I ask a question, it goes to the right hemisphere and not so much to the left hemisphere, which thrives on recall. I was asking him something that you really like about this friendship that you have with your with the neighbor, and he'll probably bring up one or two things. You know, he teaches me this, he teaches me that, and other things that you dislike also. So when you get both of these things, and then you can say, what would you change about this? What would you like differently? And things like this, you'll start understanding, is the child actually having a difficulty dealing with this relationship, or has he figured out what to do? And you'll see many children will say, Appa, you know, he does this, but I know how to deal with it like this. And then you'll realize, oh my God, he has a better solution than I can give him. So many times it's very good to start where the child is. And that we can get by asking many questions. And the questions need to be relevant. We have to have a lot of open-ended questions. You can't say, okay, does he control you? Does he manipulate you? Then it becomes a problem. Instead, we just ask a gentle question like, you know, what do you like about it? Do you want to spend more time with him? So if the child is saying, no, I don't want to play with him again, you know that, you know, the manipulation is too high and he's not able to handle the problem. So he's trying to avoid, because remember I mentioned just before we started the quality time question, there are three basic human needs: safety, satisfaction, and attachment. Safety, the safety need, I will always meet by avoiding whatever is causing me trauma. So if there is a cockroach in the room and I don't like cockroaches, I will do everything to avoid that cockroach, right? But the satisfaction need, I will meet by approaching it. Like, I love this group, like I've met the Alchemist group already. I loved the interaction I had with them. I felt very content at the end of it. So when Reena called, I immediately approached it, as opposed to certain schools that are asking me for parenting sessions, and I've had very bad experiences with them. I keep avoiding them as much as possible. See, avoidance is always for safety. Approaching is always for satisfaction. And the third need is connection. So most children, if you notice that they're avoiding something, they're not feeling safe in that relationship. If they're approaching that relationship, if they're approaching it, then they're feeling satisfied in it. So as a parent, you could use that as a rule of thumb and then work with them through it. I hope I've answered your question.
Absolutely, ma'am. Yeah. Thank you so much. And Ridula will certainly send her regards to you. So
definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll probably get to the next question. Thank you so much, Srinivasan, as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for asking that question. Let's, I think we have certain questions on the chat window also. I'm going to ask quickly Seema to unmute and then ask her question. Seema, you have a question which you put. Would you like to unmute and ask now? You can also turn on your video if you want.
Aarti, hi, this is Seema. I have two kids and two of two different age group. One of them is 21 and one of them is turning 14 today.
Okay.
So I see a major difference, but my elder one, she feels that there's a lot of stress around her, and she feels that you know, she has some commitment towards social awareness around her, and you know, she has a lot of things, like she's not a feminist as such, but you know, you can't even tell her that, oh, that is a very typical Gujarati trait. If you say that, she will take it offense personally. So how do you handle this kind of children? And my younger one,
not a child in any way. She's 21. She's an adult actually.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Answer it as a child, I will.
For me, she'll always be a child.
Little for you, I understand. Yes, and for your 14-year-old, you had a question.
For 14-year-old, that is, you know, that he's not very vocal. What I mean to say, he has a sense of belonging to more towards gadgets, but he's not very vocal. He does not come across to me and share something until unless it's really very, you know, pressing hard. So how do you get that child into opening up and talking to you?
I'll answer the 14-year-old's question first, because the 21-year-old's question is very interesting. I'm going to answer it differently. But for the 14-year-old, who is he modeling? Is there an adult in the family who is similar?
I haven't really, I mean,
So you may
looked
need
into
to
that.
see if he's modeling the behavior of someone else, because very often what will happen is this general, not communicating and all that will be picked up from one of the adults in the home. It's a very typically modeled behavior, right? Number one. Second, your second point was finds more belonging with gadgets. That could be one of the reasons that he's not communicating, in which case you may need to sit down with him, have a talk, and see how you can reduce some of these gadgets. That's the second thing that I would do. Third, I would also, because I'm giving you three directions, not having met him, I may not be able to tell you this is the only thing. The third is the difference between extroversion and introversion. Earlier, we used to believe that they were only personality traits, like an extrovert and an introvert are just personality traits. Now we know that they're chemically different in the brain. The extrovert is somebody who thrives on a chemical called dopamine, which is pleasure seeking and loud and everything. And the introvert, people like me, are people who thrive on acetylcholine. Acetylcholine, if I've done peopling today, like if I've seen 50 of you now, for the next half an hour, I have to be away from people because my brain will just be fried if I've seen people for too long. Like Zoom helps me a little bit because I'm not seeing all of you, I'm seeing tiles for some time. But if I were to actually see you, then I need about 50 to 60 minutes to just completely go into downtime. And that's quite normal at the level of the brain. Having said this, I would say, please look at whether it's model, it's because of the gadgets, or it's because of the extroversion, introversion, and then work with him. That would be the better way. The first question, which was your 21-year-old, this current generation, they are what we call the savior complex generation, because they want to come and save everybody. They want to make sure that the whole world is good and all of this. Not wrong. The idealism is very, very good as long as we can help them and support them through some of their wishes. But they're also a generation that's bogged down very, very dangerously by what they themselves call the hustle culture. And by this, I mean that they're exposed so much through social media to many things that they can do, be it a course, be it a cause that they have to be part of, be it a hashtag that they have to be participating in, and so on. Because this entire generation, if you notice, like we were also so socially driven, but we were not under the pressure of so many people in our entire generation to belong to the generation by being parts of hashtags. So if Black Lives Matter, then they have to be part of Black Lives Matter. Then if it is feminism, then they have to be part of feminism. If it is a Me Too campaign, they have to be part of Me Too. If it is suicide of Sushant Singh Rajput, they have to be part of suicide of Sushant Singh Rajput. So, it's like everything they have to, if there is a hashtag that's put on Instagram, this entire generation has to follow that. And if they are not following it, they're somehow excluded by the whole group. And that's what they themselves call the hustle culture, because they're unable to balance all of these things. And also, I mentioned the second brain revolution, the brain developing. So the brain changes start around 12 years and they go on till 26. Till 26, if you notice, the regulatory aspect of the brain is not particularly great. If I have to give you an example, you'll see in IT jobs especially, at least till recently, when the jobs started drying up a little bit, you would have noticed that they shifted jobs. They'll join campus recruitment, they'll join the job, and every 2 months shift because the team leader is not good, the canteen food is not good, the coupons that they gave are not valid, all of these things. And suddenly at 26, settle down. Whatever job is really good. That's because, they are not able to regulate. See, the emotion takes over the rationality. So that becomes a problem. My suggestion to you would be to speak with your daughter, let her know. And if she likes reading, a beautiful book that she can read is called The Teenage Brain by a neurologist by name Frances Jensen. She talks very beautifully about how the teenage brain goes through these things. That's one. And there are also several TED Talks. If she's not really a reading person, then there are TED Talks about how the late adolescent, early adult has difficulties with regulating these things. Once she's able to understand the hustle culture, it may be easier for her to handle stress. Because if you look at stress, psychologically, we've always believed that stress is 30% external, 70% internal. So when I don't know how to do self-regulation, that's when I complain of stress. So, there is another beautiful saying that I always use from one of my favorite books. You never become exhausted by doing something wholeheartedly. It's the half-hearted things that leave you exhausted.
That would be a good thing to share with her.
So you should probably ask her, what are the half-hearted things she's doing that's leaving her exhausted? I hope I answered
Okay.
the question.
Yeah. Because right now, one more share I need to tell you is, which I think most of our children are facing, is they are guilty about the very fact that they are getting everything very comfortably.
Yeah.
So
I have
that
a
guilt is
son
also
who's going
killing
through
to
something.
them.
Yeah. But
So
that usually is mitigated, or the severity is taken away when they find something meaningful to do in their life. So I have a friend. They run several industries, and they come from a very affluent family and everything. And the boy was very, very guilty that everything came to him on a platter. Like, he was able to study at the Wharton Business School and everything. Like, he did really, really well and everything. So the moment he set up his company, the first thing he did was to set up their CSR as well. And the moment he realized that he was making a difference in the lives of others, he was able to deal with that guilt. Guilt is a beautiful emotion because it gives us the opportunity to make amends in our life. And so if they're feeling guilty, ask her where she would like to make amends. It always helps.
oh, so sweet of you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Aarti. Thanks, Seema, for that question. And then we have Payal Sen, who is having a very interesting question on a strong-willed child. Payal, would you like to unmute and then ask that question now? And rest of you, I would advise, please keep your audio on mute, please. Payal, are you there? If Payal, you are waiting, let me move on to Damodaran, who is asking a question. Now, Damu, you can probably unmute and shoot your question, please.
We also have many questions on the panel. We can start reading it.
Okay, so I thought they will probably voice it out in case of.
Hello.
Damu, yes, yeah, you can ask the question.
Sorry. Yeah. Hi.
Yes.
I'm Damodaran.
Yes.
See, my daughter is, of course, I have a very elderly kids. Like I have a grandson, and my second daughter is 20. She's 22. But what conflict we face is between what they like and what is right.
What they like and what
is right. What is right. Okay. So as a parent, many times we land up in insisting them not do what is right. But it's a very paradoxical feeling, because we want the kids, we don't want to press, we want them to do what they like actually. But sometimes we are forced to pressurize on them on doing what is right. Okay, so my question is, in such situation, how to make them to do what is right, or how to change myself to accept what they like?
The second option is what will be the best option, which is changing the self. And why I'm saying this, sir, is as human beings, yes, we love our children very much, and we wish that they would, be able to do the right things. And, the right and wrong that we feel may not be the same way that they perceive it. Because again, these are all some of these rules are not absolute when you look at it intergenerationally. In certain generations, certain things have very, very clear right and wrong. So what I would do is, if this, and I know this relationship means so much to you, which is why, you're asking this question, because if the relationship did not mean anything to you, then you won't even raise the question. Because the relationship is at the core of this question. I would say that I would focus first on building the relationship, and then two, trying to have or engage in a dialogue that will help both of you understand each other. Because in the core of this question is understanding between two generations, it's not going to reflect so much in the actions as much as it's going to strengthen your relationship. So let me just put a simple set of rules, sir. After the age of 14, whenever we want to speak to somebody, there are some basic rules in the communication that we need to use. The first rule after the age of 14, when we want to initiate conversation, please let the other person know that you wish to engage in a dialogue about this topic. So for example, in your case, you're saying about some particular decision that she has taken that is not very comfortable for you or something. Let her know in advance that you wish to talk about this, and you say, let's speak tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock. Are you also free? So set a mutually convenient time to let her also know that you want to discuss this, and give her that 24 hours or 12 hours time to also be able to prepare her side of the discussion. Normally as parents, what happens, we get so enraged or very upset about what has happened. We insist on the discussion immediately. The child is probably not, child or adult or whoever is not ready for the discussion. It becomes a power struggle. Both of you end up arguing, and then, there is this cold treatment in the house for the next maybe 2 or 3 days. And you notice the younger generation is much better in the cold treatment. They can cut us off for even a month. We are the ones that feel really bad that they're not talking to us. So I would suggest the first is to give that 24-hour, 12-hour window for them to also prepare their set of their side of the argument. The second is for you to make sure that they've rested well, you're also rested well, because when you've not met your physiological needs of sleep or eating, a discussion or a communication cannot happen. Let's assume that I came onto this session without having had my lunch. My whole mind is going to be feeling hungry, because every question I'm like, oh my God, another half an hour, I'm going to be hungry, because the physiological needs will always take precedence. So before your discussion, make sure that you have had enough water and food and also rest, because that way your discussion will be more healthy. You're more nourished for the discussion. The third, please don't lecture. I know you have more experience. I know you have more wisdom. I know you've had more mistakes in your life from which you have learned, and therefore you want to insulate your child from those mistakes. I know even me, when I meet my nephews, I want to tell them, Kanna, adu pannadama, don't do that because it'll hurt. And then I say, okay, as long as there is safety, let him do it, and I'll be the go-to person if he fails. If he succeeds, then fine, I'll just watch from here. So what happens is, very often I find that they find more indigenous solutions to things than what would have happened if they had come to me. So in one way, that letting go is one of the most beautiful things that I've learned in the whole process of working with children. So what I would do is not use the lecture method. Instead, I would use short points, which I just sound out to them and allow them to speak about it. Because as they speak about it, two things will happen. One, they will give us clarity on what they're really functioning upon. What is the premise? What are the discussions that they went through or, overthought in their mind before they decided upon something? Secondly, what it also does is that it gives them the opportunity to understand that my father listened to me without offering any advice. And just for the sake that you listened, they feel supported. And they'll say, Appa, I know that you don't like this, but let me try it once. And then when they're speaking, sometimes a huge 180-degree turn happens. They're like, Illa, but actually, I think this is not the best thing. So what happens is the clarity that they don't have when they overthink may come when they're discussing it with you. So this would be the third step. The fourth step is, if you're speaking to a boy, if your child is a boy, 14 years and above, please do the discussion while walking, because they're spatial regulators. So they're going to be able to look around them and walk. If you sit down and talk to a boy, it will become a power struggle without your knowledge. And the boy is going to become very silent. So what do you think about it? Enna pa, enna? Unnala pa, illa normal pa. Okay, pa. Because what happens if you make them sit down, they're not able to spatially understand their environment. It becomes very silent. And I'm sure the men are laughing now, because you know that when you get into an argument with your spouse, this is probably what doesn't happen. Because if you have a discussion while walking, you might find solutions better. With women, sit down and speak. It's very important. So for girls, please sit down and speak. Don't sit face to face, sit beside. Because when you make eye contact, it becomes very difficult for the teenage brain to process it. Sit beside. And this becomes much easier because they feel like they're an equal. They're speaking to somebody who will value them. And they're not doing face reading, trying to do mind reading to find out, are you responding, are you not responding? This becomes a beautiful equal space for two-way communication. The power struggles are much less. And then, of course, the most important is that you need to give examples and follow it up another day. So, what you can do is have the discussion, probably 15, 20 minutes, and then say, I'm glad we had this discussion. Let's discuss it one more time, probably in a week or two. And then, she also is going to come back with some more insight. And again, why I'm asking you to take time to do this and savor this is because anything of value, anything beautiful takes time to build. It's only these instant things that are boring. These instant things like putting a post on social media and all that are very easy. But building a relationship takes time. So if you can use these rules, it might be very useful. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was really a good one.
Thanks, Damodaran. Aarti, we have another question from Jayashree Raja, who has 2 kids. Jayashree, are you there? And would you like to
read it out for me?
Yeah. So she is saying, I'm a mother of 2 sons, 8 and 5 years old. During this lockdown, especially, I find them to be hyperactive, especially at nights. They play with their fullest potential, shout, yell while playing, which was not there earlier. I don't know how to regulate it. Okay, I think it's a very genuine, timely question.
It's a very beautiful question, Jayshree, and thank you for bringing it. It's usually what's happening is if they're also having a lot of time on online classes and things like this could be the stress hormones trying to come out. So I would, if you can, and you have the opportunity for outdoor play, which is safe with social distancing or even on the terrace and things like that, somewhere either early morning or somewhere just as the sun is setting, if you can take them outdoors and help them use all the muscle groups, it will help. Because what happens is, in the absence of using muscle groups, the large muscle groups, children do have difficulty with emotional regulation. The best way is to have a combination of a little bit of crawling, little bit of climbing, little bit of jumping, running, all of this, a mixture of different types of physical activities. And it need not be rule-based like playing cricket or playing shuttle. It can just be use of the body muscles. If you don't have an outdoor space, please create one space within the home, even in the drawing room or something, with the furniture that you have, with the pillows and mattresses, where they can navigate it as an obstacle play area. Why I'm asking you word obstacle play? There is an obstacle that is created. The brain immediately looks at it from the regulatory lens. So the problem here is regulation. Excitation is high, inhibition is low. So what is happening? Child is so, like you use the word hyperactive, though it's not hyperactive. They're excitable, but they're not able to inhibit that response. So when you give an obstacle play, when you give them obstacles to play with, what will happen is the brain looks at it and says, okay, for this, I have to climb. For this, I have to hop. For this, I have to crawl. So it starts choosing the right muscle groups to be able to navigate through that. And as they're doing that, since both of them are boys, they will have a lot of fantasy that this is a pirate ship, or this is, that they're getting away from something, they story with it. So what happens, there'll be language related regulation, there'll be emotion related regulation, and also bodily regulation. That will tone down the problem that you're having. And I hope that helps you. Can we take the next question?
Yes, Aarti, we have a question from Ravi. I think it's very interesting. Can I read it out for you?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so his question is, can you provide few insights on how to constructively communicate our displeasure on kids' actions while making sure they are not emotionally disturbed?
A beautiful question again, which doesn't have a straightforward answer. So I use a rule for this one. Listen, don't lecture. Okay. So what needs to be done first is observe if a particular behavior is triggered by something physiological. Normally what happens is when children are really cranky, when they're doing something, either there could be sleep deprivation, they could be hungry, they could be thirsty. So always, whenever you're dealing with something, first check if the physiological side is normal. Without the physiological balance, trying to bring about a behavior change or an emotional change will not happen. So that's the first rule. The second rule, check if this is happening to avoid something. So sometimes, like for me, my behavior problems used to come every time before the maths test, because I was very hopeless in mathematics. So what would happen whenever there was going to be a maths test, I would have a set of behavior problems. So this was the second, this is the second thing that you could look for. Is there a task or a person or something that the child is avoiding with the behavior? This would be the second question. Now the third is check if your parenting rules and routines are very, very consistent. Now what happens is sometimes as parents, we say we shouldn't do something, and then we have done it and the child is reading that, that is acceptable behavior, and then there's a lot of inconsistency. Have I kept my promises? Check on the consistency level of your own parenting process. If there is no consistency, bring in your consistency before you do the communication. The fourth and the most important is what are the rules I will have to bring in? And this is where assertiveness comes in. As parents, we have unfortunately had very aggressive models, very controlling models. Our parents or teachers have been extremely controlling. we thrived through that, or we managed through it, but our children may not be able to do the same thing because they're a different generation. So what needs to happen, like I mentioned earlier, let them know a no means no. And as a parent, you will have to say no many more times than you say yes, because love sometimes means no, because a child may not know what is safe or unsafe for them. So saying no is very important. Keep your promise even to that. Now, for example, follow through. So if I say, no, I'm not going to give you your screen time today, even if there is a tantrum for 1 hour, don't give in. Because what happens is the child is testing limits. They're going to see, okay, if I do this, then he gives it. If I say this, then he does it. So they're going to keep checking with you. My request to you is to ensure that you're saying no. See, the thing is, emotional disturbance doesn't come in assertive communication. It comes in aggressive communication, or it comes in inconsistent communication. But when I am firm and when I'm clear that a no means no, and this is not allowed in our house, or this is not allowed in our situation, the child understands that consistently. The predictability. Can you please mute yourself? Somebody has unmuted yourself and there's a lot of disturbance, please. Yes, thank you. So here, this is where I would like for us to understand that our consistency does not cause emotional disturbance. The inconsistency and unpredictability is what causes emotional disturbance. So let me give you an example. So there was a research that was done, and participants were given very loud, like headphones that would play very, very loud music for a certain period of time. And if you know, this was physiologically very stressful. Physiologically, it causes a lot of stress for the system. And so there was one group that was told, there was a control group and there was an experimental group. One group was told that there was a red button nearby, and whenever they found that the stress was too high, they could press the red button to be able to reduce the volume. And if you noticed, the very fact that they were told that something was in their control, they experienced less stress than the people who did not know that something could be done to control the outcome. So by this, what I'm trying to say is, when children know that your parenting style is consistent, and that when you say no, you mean it for a reason, but you're not disliking them or you're not victimizing them, you still love them, and you do not allow only a certain activity, it does not lead to emotional disturbance. But it takes time for children to learn this habit. Sometimes up to 90 days of consistency is very, very important. Of course, consistency is a lifelong habit, but for it to set, you need to be patient to be able to see it at least during that period. So I hope I've answered your question.
Thanks, Aarti.
Yeah.
Yeah, Aarti, I have. Yes. You said that, I mean, as a passing remark, maybe you said, friends. Parents cannot be friends. They
should not be. Not cannot be. Should not be. It's a should.
Okay. So they can give a secure relationship, but companionship should come from the friend circle. That's very interesting. Yes. Okay. Yes. Is there a role? Is there a way that parents can play a role to help them choose the right kind of friends? Because we are all concerned about what kind of a friendship they get into, which makes or breaks them, right? So what kind of a role we need to play, and how do we bring in some kind of an awareness into them? Right. Or is it left to...
Two things that I would answer in this. One is, why should the parent not be a friend? Okay, because it's important to understand why something is not good. The first rule here is, I need friends from my own peer group, because that is how the nervous system makes sense of human relationships. So for example, if I'm a 13-year-old and I'm first getting infatuated to this boy in my class, right? This is a new experience for me, and only my peer group will have similar experiences. My parents are going to have already dealt with this in different ways, and they've become parents. They've already chosen a life partner, and they're not probably struggling as much as I am with infatuation. So when the child goes and tells, Amma, I like this boy in my class, the mother saying, all of us have gone through this. That doesn't help the child, right? The child is actually telling you this because they want you to feel equally excited. Because when they go and tell the peer group, they're saying, oh, really? Did you meet this person? Did he see you? Did you pass his letter? This is what's going to happen. And they need the peer group to be able to do that. And that is the role of the peer group. Now, for example, I usually ask mothers, when you have a problem, will you go and speak to your friend, or will you speak to your mother-in-law? Most of them say, obviously, I'll speak to my friend. I'm not going to go and tell my mother-in-law this, right? So that's the same thing. We need to deal with our life experiences with the peer, because they are the ones that are most likely to resonate with me. My parents can be supportive, my parents can be loving, all of that, but resonance comes from my own age group. That's the first thing. The second is when parents want to see if they're into good friendships, that's where the connection ritual makes a difference. Because when I have a safe space where children can communicate, they're going to let me know what my friends are like. So when I have this every day, Appa, I have this friend, this is what he said. So when you're listening, you know that this is an appropriate friendship. And, you can also say, what is it you like about this person? Just like I answered one of the earlier questions. Have these questions put to your child. What is it about this friend that makes you so happy? And then you realize that they're very gentle, small things that children like. And if there is something inappropriate, that becomes a teachable moment. You can say, this friend making fun of this person, I don't think it's a nice thing. What do you think would be a better way to deal with it? Like it recently happened. My nephew was standing outside at the gate. He's about 17, very, very empathetic and everything. He was standing at the gate and there was a person, an adult with autism, who was walking down the road, and he lives here, he walks around and all that. The adult with autism was walking around down the road, and there were new kids on the street who were bullying this person with autism. And I heard it upstairs, so I ran down knowing that this was probably something. And my nephew was standing at the gate and laughing at the whole thing. And I was appalled because he knows I work with autism. He knows I'm very resonant and all that. And so when, this whole thing, so I called those children and I said, listen, he has a difficulty and we can't make fun of them and all. I dealt with all that, but I was seething with anger when it came to my nephew. I said, how could you allow people to make fun of a person with autism, right? And then immediately I realized probably he didn't know what to do in that situation. He's always seen me deal with people with autism. He has never dealt with them. So he doesn't know. So then, it became a teachable moment, and I sat down with him and I said, in autism, these are the things that are affected. So he probably would not have those skills to fight back a bully. And my nephew immediately said, oh, that's probably why, he just kept running away. Next time I know what to do. I'm so sorry. And, it became a beautiful moment of bonding between the two of us. So many times our children may not know how to handle that situation, though they may have observed us many times. So it becomes a teachable moment. So I hope I've answered your question as well.
Definitely, yes, Aarti. And you also raised another question, because I think there is something that we are not able to understand, at least I'm not able to understand. Whenever you keep repeating, it's a teachable moment. I really like that phrase. Okay, so how do I shift from being comfort moment or a love moment and things like that to a teachable moment? Is there some way that I inform my kid or by some behavior that now it's a teachable moment, so that they are also getting into learning moment? Is that possible? No.
Teachable moments are natural moments. Teachable moments are very, very natural moments that thrive on a lot of support, love, and communication. They are not so much the explicit information as much as the feeling of support. Now, when I mentioned my nephew, and I was seething with anger, I did regulate, and then I spent some time discussing with him. I didn't tell him, see, that person is with autism and you have to do this, this, this. What I did was just talk about autism, and he immediately made the connection saying, oh, that's why he was not able to fight back. That's why he was not able to communicate back. The teachable moment is a moment of support, love, and communication. It's not explicit expression as much as it is a supportive expression. So by that, I would only say that something went wrong, but I have basic wisdom which I can share with the younger person, a younger version of me that needs this guidance at this point in time. So again, I would put questions or use facts, never use emotions. That emotional blackmail of, didn't you understand what was going there? No emotions there. There, it was only facts and questions back to his own problem-solving ability, and he's able to deal with the whole thing. So I guess I answered that. So there is comfort, obviously. Comfort zone is where I will not want to flap my wings and fly away, right? I'm just saying, okay, I'm going to just sit here because food is coming to me. I'm safe, everything. So it's sort of like that. But teachable moments are actually very beautiful moments in everybody's life. We also go through them even as adults, but in the parent-child relationship, it can be realized many, many times.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I mean, helping them make the connections with the comfort and support and love. So that's what I picked up from, what you just said. It's beautiful. Yeah, we have other questions. There are people who are raising the hands. I think a couple of hands I saw going up. Would you like to unmute and please ask? Is that Ravi or?
Can I go, TG?
Yeah. Please, Kalpana, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Aarti. I met you. Okay. So I have two teenagers, 18 and 16. And my daughter, in the last 3 years, I see that she definitely leans towards a peer group, which is very natural. And my son loves his reading and YouTube learning predominantly. We do have a great fantastic family bonding. But at this point of time, I see there as a parent, as parents, our roles have to slightly transform or modify to suit the time, the age, sorry. So I thought if there's some insights like, how I can continue this beautiful bond with the family, with the kids. So if there's something that we can.
Or the only thing I would do is probably not be so critical of your parenting, because somewhere I feel that, you feel that you could do better. I think you've already done a beautiful job.
No, I just, sorry, probably I think they letting go of you and, in terms of getting more closer to the peer group, like she's 18 and totally sucked into her new college life and all that. Yeah. And then somewhere you feel like you're left out, definitely. So that's the reason where I thought, okay, what else, what better can we do? Not what better, how can we continue this beautiful journey? Like for the last 2 years.
You'll need to let them fly away and come back to the nest.
Okay.
Because at this point in time, for them, those challenges are equally important. Getting to know the peer group, being the cool person in the peer group, establishing an identity and a role and a space for themselves there and things like that will take some time. So what you need to be at this point is the silent, supportive parent, the go-to person if something were not working out. So that would be the thing. And also, this would also push you into a lot of empty nest kind of anxiety. What's going to happen? Till now they were relying on me. Now they're able to handle their own problems. Sometimes their problem-solving abilities are better than my own and things like that. So probably here, this would be a time for you to also discover your own strengths as a parent and also redefine your role, because probably for the last 18 years, considering your daughter is 18, you've probably taken the predominant role of being only a parent. Everything else would have taken a backseat. So probably, this would be a beautiful time for you to redefine yourself more holistically. So that probably will help in this situation.
Sure. Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Ramya, you raised your hand. Would you like to go ahead and ask a question? You can unmute yourself. Yes.
Yes, thank you so much, ma'am. I've been an ardent follower of all your talks, and it's been very insightful. Thank you so much. I have a weird question, if I may ask.
It depends on how weird it is, but anyway, go ahead.
Okay, so I have two boys, and is there something that I must do as a parent of two boys, or is there something that is there a modification that I must do to my parenting to make sure that I can see you not this way and that, so I don't know.
So the thing is, somewhere we feel inadequate when we're raising a child the other gender, right? So we feel that somewhere maybe they need this, maybe they need that. It's not really that. As long as a mother or as a father, I'm responsive to my child's needs. So when my child and all of us have these unwritten rules that we pick up about our children. Like I know this mother will say, if he's going and standing there, he's asking for food. She used to be that sensitive to his needs when he was very young. But what I'm saying is, as long as you're responding to their needs, and when you don't know, you're asking them, what is it I'm not able to understand? Can you tell me? When you're able to have that two-way communication, I think it's more than enough, because it's not necessary that, the thing is, gender is a social construct. It's not a biological in terms of innateness kind of thing. Gender is a very, very social construct.
Okay.
My body may have certain organs and certain chemicals and certain hormones and all that, but gender and the roles and all of those things are very social constructs.
Okay.
Right?
So there is absolutely nothing that I must modify in the way I communicate to a girl versus I communicate to a boy?
Boys are more likely to use actions over words. Okay. That would probably be one very obvious thing, but it's not every boy and every girl also, because there are boys who love language also. Now, if you look at someone like Sashi Tharoor, who uses words more than he uses anything else, I'm sure his mother probably had no problem communicating with him, right? As opposed to, say, somebody else who's a monosyllabic person. Yeah, okay, that kind of thing. So I would just look at responsive parenting. How responsive are you to their needs? That's more than sufficient. And the only thing is, in the adolescent years, like I mentioned, there's spatial processors. So if you can have a lot more conversations while moving, it makes a very big difference. That would be it.
That will be a takeaway. Okay, sure. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Ravi, finally, you are raising your hand. Would you like to go and ask a question?
Yes.
Sure. Hi, Aarti.
Yes.
I'm a parent of a 7-year-old boy. Okay. So, like, we have been kind of practicing no screen time for him for the last couple of months.
Yeah.
Okay. But with this COVID coming in, no schools. So, he's now attending all those Zoom sessions and all in the school. Okay, but apart from that, we try to make sure that we don't expose him to gadgets. Okay, but we see that being at home now, he actually wants to have those extra time with the gadgets, or even with, let's say, if he wants to play in the computer, he wants to do some kind of a different design kind of a thing in the computer. But we actually are not sure whether we should allow screen time to him. And also, we are hearing like a couple of doctors say that no screen time is also harmful for the kid. So what is your view on that?
See, now, as far as I'm concerned, passive screen time is what a lot of research has shown is dangerous. But interactive screen time is not so bad comparatively. And by that, what I'm saying is, when I'm looking at a TV or a tab and it's giving me all the input and I'm just passively looking at it, then that is dangerous, because it stunts the growth of the prefrontal cortex, which is required for higher order problem solving and thinking. As opposed to where, like you're saying, he's just using the computer to design something. He's using the computer in a very active form where he's giving, shape to something he's imagined or thought. Then that is not dangerous at all. As long as he also has at least about 1.5 hours of physical activity, some kind of obstacle play and things where the large muscle groups are used. Why we avoid passive screen time is because it stunts imagination. Now, for example, if I ask you to close your eyes and think of a tree, each one will have a different image of a tree. But when I look at animated content, it's already told me that this is a tree. So my brain does not think beyond that. So one of the reasons is that. The second is that when I'm looking at a screen passively, I experience what is called an ocular lock, which means my eyeballs fix in the same place and the auditory area is cut off. So language learning and language processing, what we call auditory processing, tends to be stunted in many children. And the simplest example, when children are watching TV and you keep calling and they don't respond to you, that's because the auditory channels have been cut off. So these are the reasons that we avoid. See, anything in extreme is bad. Now, in today's day and age, we do have a lot more screens than they were when we were much younger. So if you were going to keep him away from screens completely also, that could be very difficult for him, because he won't have anything to converse with his peer group. When he does interact with his peer group, they're all going to be talking about a cartoon and he may not know anything about it. And he may not know how to take the conversation forward. So for that sake alone, he can be exposed to certain things. But on the other hand, if I do balance it with many other things, I do know a lot of children who go onto YouTube to be able to do it-yourself projects and things like that. So if they're using it in a very hands-on learning kind of way, it's never wrong. So I hope that sort of answers your question. I'm doing a lot of research on how online learning affects the brain and things. Hopefully by November, I should be able to publish it. But at the moment, we've noticed that the conferencing platforms like Zoom and Meets and things like that are not particularly helpful in learning. But unfortunately, the schools have not listened to what I'm saying, because this is the easiest software to sort of invest in. It's become an economic decision over a learning decision, and so it is a little difficult. There are few schools that have invested in good learning platforms, and that's showing us a huge difference in our research. So apart from that, I hope I've answered your question. Is there anything else that you would like me to clarify?
No, I think that answers my question. Sure. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, Aarti, I think we are left with another 5 minutes
yeah,
of
okay.
time. Yeah. So I just have a question in terms of with the COVID situation, all the parents are going through typical kind of environment where the kids' times have undergone a drastic change, right? So earlier, because the schools and even weekdays and weekends used to be regulated in terms of what time they wake up, go to the class. Now COVID, practically even the parents are at home, and the timing has shifted. Some of the kids are going to sleep by 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. We do not know what they are doing and things like that. Is this okay in terms of this time shift? Is that okay, or we need to bring in a discipline, or should we have those moments of teachable moments to tell them this is not okay? Is it the time concept is totally different for them? Is it becoming so different for them? They're comfortable. Their friend circle is or awake and all those kind of things is what they're saying as a logic. So what is happening?
It's not logic. It's just an excuse because logic will always have rationalization for it. This is not rational. And again, for us, from the mental health space, we have found sleep to be one of the primary drivers for mental health, for mental well-being. Sleep in itself is the brain's restorative way of dealing with things. And when I say restorative, I'm going to have difficult times, I'm going to have difficulties, I'm going to be able to filter out these during sleep. So there are two types of people. We call them the owls and the larks. The larks are children who wake up early in the morning. They're very, very alert. I'm a lark. Like 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm awake. My mind is alert. I'm doing a lot of things. But after 8 in the evening, I'm usually like almost useless to speak to. But then the owl is the one that's awake from 6 o'clock in the evening till late in the night. And there are two types of brain function. So what I would ask for parents to look at is your child an owl or a lark? And have a discussion about why sleep is important, and be a little regimental if you need to set the physiological routine. Sleep, eating, meeting thirst needs, and physical exercise, there is no compromise, because just like you tell children you can't go out now without a mask, you're strict about hygiene. For mental hygiene, sleep is primary. I would never ask anybody to compromise on that. And any child, and invariably when people come in for counseling, the first rule, I would ask them, how have you been sleeping? And they'll say, for the last 6 months, I've had very erratic schedules. And I know that's where the problem has started. Because the moment you do that, emotional regulation goes away. You're not able to regulate emotion. You're not able to deal with stress. You're not able to handle your relationships. So it becomes a vicious cycle. Keeps going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then after a point, you lose your ability to deal with these situations in the most balanced form. Sleep provides a safe environment for the brain to be able to deal with its challenges. And if you don't follow that rule and then expect that an alprazolam or a particular drug is going to change me, it doesn't make sense. Sleep is primary. In fact, that's also why the first few symptoms of anxiety disorders or any of your depression or anything will be a sleep disturbance, because it's telling you something's not okay there. Okay. So to use it the other way, I would start any kind of behavior intervention with sleep, because if sleep is balanced, bringing everything else into perspective becomes easier.
Okay.
I hope I answered that.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And then I think it's almost time,
So there's a question about emotional regulation and one on toddler tantrums. I'll just quickly take
Would you like to? Yeah, please.
I have time. I don't want people to feel that their questions were not answered. Toddler tantrums, please understand, this is called the terrible twos. That's the first brain revolution. You don't know why they're crying. They'll be crying for this pencil. As soon as you give this pencil, they'll cry for not giving the pencil late, then giving the pencil in the right hand. See, the thing is, the toddler's brain is going through a lot of unnecessary, or rather, I won't say unnecessary is the wrong word. It's going through very, very unprecedented changes. So they don't know how to regulate it. So for a toddler, the use of the large muscle groups is the easiest way to develop regulation. So my request to you is, as a parent, during the tantrum, don't say anything. When the child is already crying, don't raise your voice. Don't say, keep quiet, don't do this. Because the moment you do that, it goes there. It has to make sense. Already, I'm not able to deal with the input in my brain. So the tantrum becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you lose control. Sometimes you hit. All these things will happen. When the child is already crying, please just hold them close to you, and if needed, rock them and calm them. because they're going through something difficult and they're reaching out to you through crying, saying, I'm not able to make sense of my emotions. Please make sense of it for me. So that is called co-regulation. So please calm them down without speaking. The more language you use, more difficult it becomes for the child. Walk with them, carry them, walk with them. Movement and touch work much better in toddler tantrums. And apart from that, to be able to deal with toddler tantrums, have a lot of obstacle play, arrange 3 chairs, let them crawl under that, climb, little bit of dangerous play, little bit of messy play, playing in mud, sand, all these things will help you regulate toddler tantrums much faster. And this question about he uses logic and tries to prove what he's doing is right. Every teenager believes that he or she knows best and you are foolish, that you don't know anything. So with the teenager, if there is something like this, in that heat of the moment, please don't have a discussion. When it's already becoming a power struggle. So he has a point of view, you have a point of view, and this is going to become a power struggle. You're going to keep pushing each other back and forth. Instead, you can say, see what you've done. I'm not very, very comfortable with it. Please, let's discuss it after about an hour. I'd like you to bring up your side of it. I'll bring my side of it. And with an open mind, let's resolve it. It may need a little bit of patience from our side, but that is the fastest way to mitigate this, to be able to reduce the intensity of teenage tantrums. So I hope that helps you as well.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. A single
Hello,
parenting. There's a question on single parenting. See, the one thing with single parenting in the book, in fact, there's an entire segment on single parenting. I've talked about what you can do and what you cannot do, but there are simple rules. One, please have a support structure in place, because you will be playing the role of both parents. So please have either friends or extended family who may be able to give you a little bit of downtime, because it can be very exhausting playing both roles at all times. Second, right from the beginning, please don't feel guilty that you shouldn't tax your child and things like that. Right from the beginning, help them to be part of the family routines and doing chores and things like that, because individually taking care of the whole house may be difficult for you. These would be 2 things that I would work on. Second, third thing is, if it was a legal separation because of which you're a single parent, please don't talk ill about your spouse or their family to your child, because the child cannot be forced to take sides. It's very, very unfortunate if you're doing that. Please stop that. If it has happened because of death or something like that, I would ask you to do something very simple. Find out if your child is grieved. And if the child wants to talk about the parent who's missing or things like that, let them have a discussion with you. Answer to the best of your ability, because sometimes these unresolved emotions are the reasons why single parenting sometimes can be very difficult. So I hope I've answered that question. There are other rules. The entire segment in the book has an entire part on single parents and what you can do step by step. So you could probably have a look at that as well. Right. So I think I've sort of...
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
I just have one question.
Yes.
So I have a 14-year-old girl, and I have only one daughter.
Yourself? Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Punkudi Tanigaivelu.
Oh.
I'm attending this session with a reference from Sri Bharani Anandvel from CBS Academy. Okay. So as I said, I have a only daughter who is like 14 years. It is kind of become like whenever we go, she's saying like, you guys keep on telling me something to do this, to do that. And when you go into a room nowadays, it's like, for what have you come? It's it. Then if I go move out, she says something, and I say, what did you say? No, I didn't say anything. If I no, you just tell me what did you say just now. No, if I say, we will end up in a fight. So that's okay. You ignore that. You go now. So it is kind of, she's curling going into a shell of herself. that is what I feel. I do not know if it's like part of growing up.
Start with the connection ritual, because this is telling me that there is a communication breakdown straight out, because both of you are getting provoked easily and triggered easily.
Okay.
So the thing is, start with the communication ritual that I started out with, and you can let her know that, you attended a session and then you realize that some areas of change are required in your behavior as well. And that it can happen only if both of you are able to, have open discussions about it. And initially, she's not going to trust you. So for you to set the connection ritual itself will take you about 3 weeks. But don't give up. Because what happens is, you know, once we do a session and all, you'll be in like full josh. Today you'll go and try communication ritual. Child will trash you. You'll like, get out, don't talk to me, something like that. And then, you know, we're like, oh, this nonsense psychologist said something. Everything of value takes time. Like I mentioned to another question, anything of value takes time. See, just like, you know, building a marriage, it takes several years for it to become beautiful companionship, right? For you to build a beautiful friendship takes time. It's not like, you know, you and your friend met on day one and from day two you became best friends. You do have your fights, you do have your arguments, but what happens is you keep working on it every day. So similarly, this is a teenager who at some point is not feeling completely trusted. And, you know, there could be incidents that led to it and things like, we're not going to that. But what I'm trying to say, unless you establish a bridge upon which communication can be built, communication may be completely broken down. So here also what's happening when you enter the room, you know, she's already looking at you like she's threatened.
This is happening because of all the online classes. So before this, there was not much of gadget usage. Okay.
See, I won't I won't blame one thing for so much of a communication breakdown. Number one. Second, it can also be a lifestyle change of not having enough physical activity and things like that. Teenage girls require between 250 and 300 minutes of physical activity to regulate progesterone. High progesterone can also cause these kind of things like, you know, having PMS all the time. Can you imagine how dangerous that is? Right? That can also cause this irritability. So if you want, your connection ritual can be built around going for a short walk together, playing shuttle together. It can be something as simple as that. That would help mitigate all of this.
Okay, so in fact, my first question in the chat was like, when you mentioned about connection ritual, will she even come into a ritual like that, a scheduled something?
You have to explain it to her and do it gently. Let it be a enjoyable time, because in that, you know, if you're giving advice, telling them in my childhood I did this and all, child say, oh my God, it will be nonsense. Like, you know, it's going to be the worst. See,
it is like grandma talk now. She says, okay, now don't start this, grandma, go out.
So it can be a silent walk, like with one of my nephews with whom there was a communication breakdown. The one thing that we did in our communication breakdown, we used to just go for a silent walk every day. No one will talk. He won't talk, I won't talk, but we did this every day. And he also enjoyed it. And then on one day when we went for the walk, I also took him bird watching. I said, you know, I brought my binoculars today because we're going to look at the birds. And that opened out everything for us. So it takes time to build. It takes time to build. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, this is Devraj.
Yes.
I have two kids. One is 9 years old boy and another one is 6 years old boy. And the first one is all perfect, do everything. The second one always want to fight, always want to cry. Any game, anything, he want to win.
How old is he?
6 years.
He's normal. He's normal. He's egocentric. Till 7 years, children don't understand winning and losing.
The winning is not only with brother. The winning is always with anybody. With mother, father.
Till the age of 8 years, they cannot understand losing at all. Sharing and losing come after 8 years. So he's normal. I wouldn't do anything for him.
Yeah, not anything. Nobody should scold him. Even
Nanda ulagam, egocentric abdina Nanda ulagam. I'm the world. I'm the world. You have to understand me. I won't understand you. He has no capacity to take your perspective.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the capacity to take your perspective, and that's age related. Don't do
very luckily, all the stuff so far is very good. Even if teachers scold, same reaction is shown to the teacher also.
Yeah, because he's normal. See, normal whatever is normal. And he's being normal. He's being normal.
Okay.
Not to worry. We call it egocentricity. It's normal, expected. For 7.5, 8 years, it will change on its own. Don't worry. Okay. I'm glad you brought that question. It's beautiful. Thank you. So I think we'll wind up because it's already 4:40. But thank you so much for joining me, and I hope it was useful for everyone. Alchemist, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it. I hope it was useful as well.
From Alchemist Club, thank you, Aarti, for your time. I hear from Reena that you conduct a lot of online sessions, and we added one more for this. But nevertheless, very enlightening session, and I hope all the participants learned something today. And in a time forum like this, we may not be able to answer all the questions. I still see something popping up there.
Yeah.
Plus, we made an effort, and I hope everybody learned it. And thank you for your time. Hoping to see you sometime soon once a lifetime.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Vignesh here again, and Mridula's just up, and I have like a huge list of notes which she's going to take into her psychology classes as well. So,
thank you.
Yeah, pleasure, and yeah, we will catch up soon, very soon. Yes.
Sure.
Stay safe.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, ma'am.
It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you, Alchemist team.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Wonderful session.